Welcome to Whitechapel. This whole area is dripping in hidden histories, and Andy is going to tell you about it, but we're standing at the entrance to Button Street, which will take you down to Mathew Street. Now, lightning struck twice in Mathew Street, in the 60s with the Beatles and the Cavern, and later from 76 to 1980, there was a post-punk club called Eric's, and I would argue it was far more creative,
I'd agree,
than that period with the Beatles. There was a whole eclectic range of bands that possibly mightn't have existed without Eric's, and certainly used Eric's as a springboard to huge chart success in the 80s. They were eclectic and completely different from one another, unlike the Merseybeat scene. Arguably, the most eclectic was a band called Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, also known as OMD. To date, they have had 7 top 10 singles, 7 top 10 albums, and they've also had a US top 5 album. The lead singer is Mr. Andy McCluskey, and he's very kindly agreed to take us around this whole area and share with us his hidden music history.
Thank you very much. We got Epstein here, who you will know as the manager of the Beatles, and he took his walk where his shop Nems was. So we walked down there to the Cavern Club, and that's where we're going to go. So obviously Epstein and his record store were here. He managed so many of the big bands, and he was really important to breaking open the Liverpool scene. Once the Beatles hit it, of course, there was a tsunami. Every record company in London then came up to Liverpool looking for the next Beatles, and there was a whole plethora of successful bands in the early 60s that came out of Liverpool. But obviously him discovering the Beatles down the road was what started it in Liverpool in the 60s, and then obviously the Merseybeat scene was huge. Curly Music, who rented us our studio, we got to know them because they ended up owning the whole building. We rented the back of the first floor off them, and amazingly they let 3 19-year-olds, because our manager was also 19. He was our manager, by the way, because he had the tape recorder and a van. That's how you become a band's manager. The record company gave us £30,000 to make our first album, and because we thought nobody would buy it, we thought, well, we're going to build a studio and record it in our own studio. And then when we get dropped, because nobody buys the record, we'll have our own studio. So we talked to the guys in Curly, they had space, and we built our studio in here. And originally this building had been a warehouse, and it had also been a print works. And these massive strap supports were to reinforce the floorboards so that the printing machines in here weren't going to come through the ceiling. We talked to Curly Music when we got our 30 grand, and we said we want to build our own studio, and they said, well, we've got 5 floors here. You can have half of the first floor for 25 quid a week. And we used to come in through the back entrance, we'd come up the staircase. Now this room was one huge wide room, and what used to be the toilet on this floor, that was where we built our control room. It was really small, and we had fuck off JBL speakers, no wonder I'm deaf. And it was tiled, it wasn't acoustically treated at all. And we built our studio. We were very fortunate that we got onto a record label called Factory Records, totally by accident. They released our first single. That single was heard by a girl who had just started a record company called Carol Wilson, Dindis Records, which was a subsidiary of Virgin. And she was the crazy woman who gave 3 19-year-olds 30 grand to build a studio. So we took this place on, and we thought we'll try and build a studio. But somebody else who'd also heard our first single was a guy called Gary Newman, and he bought it in rough trade just before he had 2 massive #1 singles in 1979. And he was going out on the road. We'd just been offered a deal as well in the summer of 79, but he came to see us play, because on Factory Records we were on the label with Joy Division and a certain ratio, and we played the Nashville rooms on a factory night, and he'd come to see us play down there, and he saw that we were a 2-piece. Now he had such a big stage set with a giant curtain so that nobody could see the stage set before he came on stage. There was no space at the front of the curtain for a full-size band, so when he realised that he liked our music and there was only 2 of us, we got the gig. It's a total fluke. I mean, my entire music career is all based on jammy accidents. It's brilliant. But it's, I mean, when the doors opened, we walked through and took our chance. But so we were late getting in here because we had to go on tour with Gary Newman in September 79. So when we finally get in here in October, some bastard had robbed the lead off the top of the roof. And it was coming down all the floors, so we frantically trying to make a record before the water started coming through this ceiling. It was coming down floor by floor. And when we finished, just before Christmas in 79, the last song we recorded was a song called Pretending to See the Future. And you can actually hear, if you solo my lead voice, you can hear the water dripping into the buckets that were all around me as it was just pouring in. We just had to make this record and get the hell out of here and then hope they fix the roof and move all our equipment into the control room, which was the only dry place in there because it had a concrete ceiling. But in here, we recorded our first album, which quite frankly, we didn't really know what we were doing. And if you listen to our first album now, it sounds like 3 19-year-olds trying to make a record without really knowing what they're doing. But we finally had a hit with our third single, and the album never got higher than number 27 in the chart, but it went gold because it just kept selling. And then we were like, oh God, we didn't get dropped. They're going to want us to make another album. And so our first 4 albums were either recorded here or demoed here. I think we started to realise after the first album that we needed help. We couldn't actually do a proper recording. So we actually we wrote another album in here very, very quickly. Our first 2 albums were both released in 1980, about 8 months apart from each other. It was nuts. But we were so excited that we were in the music industry and people were paying us to do just what we wanted. We were just full of ideas. It was just constantly pouring out. All we wanted to do was come in here and write music and record it. And so it was just this tsunami of ideas coming out. We were so excited. We don't care if we weren't making any money. I mean, in fact, I think I was taking home less when I was signed to a record label than I was. I used to be in the civil service. I used to work where BME is now, in the Cunard building, is where I did my only 9-to-5 job in my life. And I had an in-tray and an out-tray processing cargo entries for the customs office. I was getting £64 a week down there, which in 1979 was a shitload of money. I was earning half of that when I was in the band, and I'd already had a hit. That's the reality of the music industry. So you be careful. So the second album we wrote in here, a song called Enola Gay, had actually already been written. Paul's mum because she was a widow, Paul lost his dad when he was 2, Paul's mum used to work 6 days a week. And so it was great because my house was full of my family and greyhounds. So Paul's house was empty when his mum was at work. So we used to write at Paul's house. And so I'd written Enola Gay at Paul's house on my own. It's the first song that either we'd written, just one or the other of us, because we'd been on the dole for so long. The dole people said to Paul, because he kept turning down jobs, because he was actually a trained electrician, he'd been to college, he kept turning down jobs to be in the band and write songs. They said, if you don't go and do this work experience thing, carrying a hod of bricks at the rebuilding of Hoylake Baths. So he wasn't around to do music. So I was in his house, I wrote Enola Gay on my own. All the rest of it was written in here, but we went to Ridge Farm down south to record, and we went in with a producer and an engineer who would make it sound a bit more professional. So the second album was done down there. Obviously Enola Gay was a huge hit. The funny thing was that when I wrote it, Paul Humphreys in the band and Paul Collister, our manager, both said, that's cheesy pop shite. We don't even want it on the album, let alone a single. So band politics, you guys know about band politics, you know. So it was just one of those things. Like the record company heard it and they went, no, that's got to be the single. The others acquiesced, and the bloody thing sold 5 million. And it was like number 1 in France and Italy for 3 months. And it was just like, we couldn't believe it. I had a bass guitar, which my 16th birthday, I said, give me money. So that everybody gave me money. I went to a second-hand store in Birkenhead Park. The only bass I could afford was a left-handed bass. And I'm right-handed. But I bought it. It was the only one I could afford. I just turned it over and I learnt upside down. Paul didn't have any money to buy keyboards, but he would borrow his auntie's radios, rip out the circuits and make these things that just made noise. And that's how we started when we were 16. We didn't have a keyboard, we had an upside down bass. and we borrowed a Wem copycat and a fuzz box, and we just made the most weird ambient shit you could ever imagine. Until we got a cheap Vox organ and a cheap electric piano. And then for 3 years, we wrote music like that, and our mates who were all into like Genesis and Pink Floyd and the Eagles just were like, that's not music. What are you doing? That's not music. But we were excited because I'd heard Kraftwerk in 1975, Autobahn. I was like, that's what I want to do. But we can't afford a synthesizer. But with my bass and Paul's little organ and electric piano, we were trying to do the best we could. Finally, when we decided to play Eric's, and we'll talk about this in there, we didn't have a synthesizer for the first 6 gigs that we played. We were borrowing synthesizers. I mean, this was how poor and homemade the whole thing was. We were a pair of chances, and we got really, really lucky. When we decided to form a band, and when I'm in Eric's, I'll tell you how we started, but we decided to be a band. We decided to take a chance, and because Eric's used to have a Thursday night where you could be, local bands would play, it was like an open mic night thing. I mean, that changed so many people's lives. We decided to play there, and we knocked on the door, because we had played... band The Id, which was a sort of prog rock band, had played Eric's on a Thursday night. So we knocked on the door. I was praying, because it was run by then. There was 3 people started it, but by then it was Roger Eagle, who's infamous, and Pete Fulwell. And I was praying that Roger wasn't going to be in the office, because he scared the shit out of me. He was big and grumpy and chain smoking. And it was Pete Fulwell. I was like, oh, great. Pete, hi, Andy and Paul from The Id. Could we play on a Thursday night, just us 2 doing our electronic music? He went, yeah. What you called? I went, we thought you'd tell us to fuck off. We haven't actually got a name. So we'll get back to you. So went back to Mel's, and on my bedroom wall was like my diary. I used to write things down on it and ideas and things. And we were just looking for an... Oh yeah, I was going to write a song called Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark with recorded wall noises and things. We didn't do it, so... Well, that's fucking weird, isn't it? People will know that we're not a punk band with a name like that. Orchestral Manoeuvres, yeah, that'll do for Pete Fuller. So that's how it started. Now, we were quite lucky, actually, because in hindsight, we could have been called something else, which, when I phoned up Sounds for the gig guide saying, hi, can we get in your... Sounds was a music paper, by the way. There used to be papers for the music industry. I phoned up and I said, can we get in your gig guide? He went, yeah, where are you playing? Eric's. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, Eric's, yeah, we always put them in, yeah. What date are you on? October the 12th. Oh, October the 12th, yeah. What are you called? Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. He went, fuck off, you'll never get anywhere with a name like that. What? All right, we'll put you in. Are you having a joke? No, seriously? All right, okay, we put you in. It could have been worse, because right under Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, we could have been called Margaret Thatcher's Afterbirth. I'm not sure we would have got on top of the pops with a name like that, but still. So that's how pretentious we were. So when we came in here to this derelict warehouse with the rain pouring down, we thought, well, we're going to record our album here, so it needs a name. So we called it The Gramophone Suite. It's another pretentious name. Because everybody used to think, oh, The Gramophone Suite. Oh, it's a series of recording studios. It's a suite of different recording studios. No, it's a shithole. Where the water comes through the roof and it's always bloody freezing. So it's like, you know, it was... We were just bluffing it. Just bluffing it all the way through. And I still am after 44 years. I wanted to change the world. I don't know how I was going to try and change the world with music, but I wanted to change the world with music. It was that important. That's why I wrote songs about planes that drop atom bombs and oil refineries and warfare and stuff. And after the 3rd album was huge, I thought, well, everybody's listening, but I'm not changing the world. What's going on? And then this guy said to me, well, why are you writing songs about bloody Joan of Arc? Write something political and change the world. So I did, and nobody bought it. So we went from 4 million global sales to 350,000 on the fourth album. The record company joked afterwards through gritted teeth that it had shipped gold and returned platinum. So with that, we'll leave, because we left here after that fourth album. We left here stupidly. We got bored of being in the same room, and we became nomads, and we went to record in other studios and spent a bloody fortune. For those of you who are studying the history of music, we're in a postmodern era now where everything's kind of atomized. But when I was younger, things were linear. It was a timeline. This was in fashion, then that was out of fashion, and something else replaced it. And so every 3, 4, 5, 6 years, the music scene changed, the style of the music changed, the haircut changed, the clothes changed. And what was 5, 6, 10 years earlier was out of fashion. It was considered passé. Nobody wanted it. So by the time we were coming here, we just ancient history, the Beatles. Oh, love me do. So, yeah. Obviously, as I got older and I mellowed a bit, I realised that they were quite good actually, and they did amazing journey they went on, from the simple, naive songs to the complicated, amazing stuff they did of the psychedelic era. But to us, it was ancient history. We wanted nothing to do with it. When Eric's first opened, all of these bands like The Clash and Blondie and all the famous bands who played here, they would have to come out of the dressing room, walk through the audience and go to the stage, and then have to come back in here. Very often, bands who are now name bands, who you saw on Jimmy's flyers, the Human League and Simple Minds and Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark and Joy Division, there'd be nobody here, when they were first starting out. Now, we played our very first gig here on October the 12th, 1978. They let us play. We called ourselves Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. We were only going to do one gig. That was it. We were just going to dare to do this gig, say we'd done it, and then go and do whatever else we was going to do. And I think there was 30 people in the audience. There was about 4 or 5 family. Now, when the place was empty and the band on stage was not deemed to be cool, or just artists who were in bands who were in the audience, there was a chasm from the front of the stage to those pillars. That 12, 15 foot was no man's land. Nobody would come beyond the pillars. Nobody wanted to be so uncool that they get near the front of the stage, unless it was a really big band, and then everybody was jammed in. So you'd stand on this stage, and you could see people in The Teardrop Explodes and Echo and the Bunnymen, and Jane Casey, and Holly Johnson, and Pete Wiley, and you'd be standing there, and they'd be leaning on the pillar. If you were lucky, they'd normally be at the back of the room, but if they were leaning on the pillar, I know what they're saying, because I stand on the pillar, and I say the same thing. It's like, they're all right, but they're shite compared to us. It's just... It was soul destroying, this chasm. Nobody would come nearer than the pillars. Everybody would just lean on the pillars and look really nonchalant. Yeah, all right. We were in here in the summer of 1978. I don't know who we were watching. And over there was the DJ booth, and this song came on. And I looked at Paul and I went, what the hell is that? That is amazing. It was this like slab of electronic minimalism. It was kind of like electronic pop music version of brutalism architecture. It was just relentless and simple. I went over to the DJ, who was Norman Killen, who I still know, used to work for NML as well.
He did.
And I said, what's that? And he got this one and he went, it's English, on Mute Records, Warm Leatherette by The Normal. I went back to Paul and I said, somebody's listening to what we're in. Because you got to remember, there was no internet then. It was just what you read in the music papers. And we were like, somebody else is into electronics. Somebody else has been listening to Kraftwerk and the German stuff. And they've made a record. We need to be a band and come and play here on a Thursday night. We've got to do it. We've got to do it once. So we went down to the office and knocked on the door and said, can we play? What you called? We haven't got a name. That was when it all started. That song, Norman playing that one, we just went, fuck. Somebody's listening to what we're into and they've made a record. Now, the interesting story is, The Normal was one guy, a guy called Daniel Miller, who created Mute Records to make his own records. We heard The Normal by Daniel Miller in here. A few months later, we supported him, actually, because Cabaret Voltaire was supposed to play with him. We dropped out, so we got to support Daniel Miller, and we told him, oh, you know, your record changed our lives. Next year, 79, we released Electricity on Factory. These kids in Basildon, Essex heard it, gave up their guitars, started to play synths, and signed to Mute Records, Depeche Mode. So complete circle in less than a year. We heard Daniel Miller's Warm Leatherette here, Depeche heard our song Electricity and decided to play synthesizers and signed to Daniel Miller's record label. That's how the music industry works sometimes, it's weird. But we had played here the first night and we supported a guy called John Dowie, who was actually a comedian musician. And little did we know at the time that he was going to be signed to Factory Records. We'd never heard of Factory Records. So Pete Fulwell said, oh, what you did was quite interesting actually. We've got a reciprocal arrangement with a new club in Manchester called The Factory. Would you like to go there? Because the guy you're supporting came from them. Would you like to go over there? And we said, all right, well, we're only going to do one gig, but we'll do two. Sod it, we'll go to The Factory. So we went to The Factory, which was actually, it was the Russell Club in Hume. And if you've been to Hume in Manchester, it's still scary. And they just called it The Factory once a week, because it was named after Andy Warhol's factory, wasn't it? So we went there and we supported Cabaret Voltaire, who were from Sheffield. And because by this time we were starting to realise, oh, there's a band called Human League. They're into electronic music as well. And so, where's this all coming from? We thought we were the only people that like Kraftwerk in Britain. So we went to Factory and we met a guy called Tony Wilson, who was a TV news presenter. And we went, oh, yeah, we met him at the Factory. And then the next week, the Human League are on Granada Reports, which is the news programme that Tony Wilson presented. We thought, well, we met him last week, maybe we could get on. So we sent him a cassette saying, can we get on your TV programme? Anyway, 2 weeks go by, we didn't hear from him. We thought, well, we're not getting on. And I thought this was an apocryphal story, and it's true, because I met his then wife, Lindsay, and she said, yes, it's true. She got in the car, she went, what's the shopping bag full of cassettes, love? And he went, oh, rejects, I'm taking them to the tip actually. People who wanted to get on the new record label and want to get on the TV. She went, oh, okay. Puts her hand in and goes, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, that's a strange name. And he went, oh, they played the club last week, they're shit. Hairy guys from Liverpool, electronic, it's not rock and roll at all. She went, oh, great name though, isn't it? Put it in. On comes Electricity. She went, that's a hit, love. I went, no, hairy guys from Liverpool playing synthesizers, I hate them. It's not rock, it's not authentic, it's not punk, it's not valid. She went, yeah, but that's a hit. And so apparently he leans over and patronisingly taps her on and goes, all right, love, I'll sign them for you. And that is how you get a record deal. You're fished out of the reject bag on the way to the tip because you had a cool name. The wife plays you and goes, that's a hit. Now, Factory had decided to be a label, and their business model, comes back to business models, isn't it? They had a business model, was that they were going to sign local artists, demo them, basically release their songs as demos, make a few thousand, hope John Peel played it, because John Peel, late night on Radio 1, was the guru. Anybody knew, if you got on John Peel, because everybody stayed up from 10 till 12 every night on Radio 1 to listen to what John Peel was playing, because he had all the cool stuff. And John Peel played Electricity, and we got the deal. But it was just, the idea was that they were a small label, and they were going to sell bands on. So that's what happened to us. Tony Wilson could change his mind really quick. We went to Granada Studios after he called us to say, I want to sign you. We were like, oh, wow, great. We didn't even know you had a label. We would just sort of blag our way onto the telly. He says, yeah, come on down, I'll meet you. And so he went from telling his wife, hairy guys from Liverpool playing synth shit, to, you guys are the future of pop music. And we're like, fuck off, we're experimental, we're not pop. But if you're signing us, if you want to make us a record, you can call us whatever you want. So yeah, Tony managed to do this kind of mental jig where he decided we were going to be the future of pop music. And he sent the record out to various labels. And there was this girl called Carol Wilson, no relation, who had actually been, I think, a lawyer at Virgin Records. And Richard Branson decided he wanted to start a publishing company as well, because he wanted to eat off every plate. If we're signing people, so he said, would you like to run the publishing company? I said, I don't know anything about music. It's all right. It's all about money. You know how to do deals. You do the publishing. So she was the publishing company, and she signed this guy from Newcastle called Gordon Sumner, who then started a band called The Police and changed his name to Sting and sold bazillions of records. So in 1980, Richard Branson says, "Oh, do you want a bonus? That's great, you made me millions." She said, "No, I want a record label." So, all right, you can have your own record label. So she started a record label called Din Disc, which I think is Norwegian for your record or something, Din Disc. And Electricity lands on her desk, and loved it. We put our number on the back of it, smart move. She phones up our manager, who had the Vision High van and the tape recorder, and says, "Are the band playing anywhere? We want to come and see them." We didn't have any factory gigs for 3 weeks. So she comes up to Paul's mum's back room, and she sits on the sofa, and we played our entire set of 7 songs. And she goes, "That's great, thank you very much. Nice to meet you." And off she goes, and went, "Oh, right, well, that's the last we see of her then." 2 weeks later, we're playing at the Imperial Ballroom in Blackpool, supporting Joy Division again. We just finished, we're just loading the Vision Hire van. And she turns, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to come and see you. I'm late, we got stuck on the M6. I'm going to Scotland on holiday, but I've missed you." "Yeah, we've missed you." She said, "Oh, well, here, read this on the way home." All right, so put all the stuff in. My turn to sit in the front seat, because I couldn't drive, but our manager could. Paul Humphreys was in the back, holding the gear from sliding around on the back of the van. And I pulled down the visor, flipped the light on, and I go, "Right, what's this? I think we're being offered a 7-album recording deal." And it was like, "What?" I don't know how we didn't crash and slide off the road. I was like, it's like 7 albums. Like, they're going to give us £30,000 for the first. The Blackpool gig was our 17th gig as Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. I think it was May '79. So it was 7-8 months after we'd invented ourselves to do one gig, and we got offered a 7-album contract. I am the jammiest bastard. Face of the earth. And we recorded our album in the studio around the corner, and we did a tour. We had decided we didn't want to be a two-piece anymore. And amazingly, 2 of our mates who used to think our music was shit, when we got a recording contract, said yes to joining the band. So we got a drummer and a keyboard player. We didn't want our drummer to actually have a real drum kit, so we built this thing out of practice pads with contact mics on. Which he hated, and he made sure he hit the contact mic all the time to break it, so we had to have a real kit. Penny Kiley, who was a journalist from Liverpool, Penny Kiley, she reviewed our gig. This was the first night of a sold-out British tour, and we were actually going to come back and play at the Mountford Hall at the end of the tour. And she reviewed it and said, "Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark are going to be big. You can tell by the strangers queuing up outside who never used to come here. You can tell by the shiny new equipment." And then she went on to destroy us by saying how crap all the songs were apart from Electricity. But and in fact, yesterday Norman sent me a review that she did a month or 2 after that. And when when she was reviewing the first album, and she just said, "It's quite pretty, but they'll never achieve the heights of Electricity ever again." I was like, wow, journalism. Oh, man, knife in the heart. But, you know, when we were trying to do something different, it was just, we were just on a journey. And it, you know, we weren't the only band here. You know, Echo and the Bunnymen, different. Teardrop Explodes, different. Dalek, I Love You. But this was the place that people came because they built it, you know? You build it, we will come. All of the rejects, all of the outcasts, all of the arty weirdos, all the people who wanted to dress differently, who would get beaten up on the way here on the bus, but once they were in here, they were safe. The thing was, every single person in the audience here was in a band. That's why it was so terrifying to play here. And, you know, I say, us and the Bunnymen and the Teardrops all played on a Thursday night within 3 weeks of each other, the very first gig of each band. One day you'd be in here watching XTC or Simple Minds or The Cure or Per Ubu. I love Per Ubu. But it was just all these amazing bands you'd see here. And then the next day you were on the stage. You could be on the stage. Admittedly, the room was bloody empty, but you were still on the same stage. And that was the power of this place. And it reopened a while ago as Eric's. I invented my band to play here. If Eric's didn't exist, I wouldn't have had a career in music. I would have gone to Leeds to do fine art degree, where, by the way, I would have been in the same class as Green Gartside, the lead singer of Scritti Politti, and Dave Ball and Mark Arman from Soft Cell. That could have been a super group, or a super ego bus stop, probably. But yeah, so, you know, this place was the place that changed my life. Because it existed and had an open door policy to local bands. You know, are you weird? Do you look crazy? Get on that stage. We want you. You're probably more interesting than most of the other shit that's around. And that was the great thing. And unfortunately, the night that we closed our tour after opening here in February, we closed up in the Mountford and the police busted the place. It was the last night of Eric's in 1980. And the city lost an incredible, incredible venue that had the most wonderful policy towards encouraging local artists. My generation would not be in the music industry if this place didn't have Thursday nights where you could get up and do your thing. I think that's the end. Thank you very much.